Let's Listen and React with LUIS. LUIS is the acronym for Language Understanding Intelligence Service. A little bit about me. I've been a software developer since 1995. You can find me on Twitter using the handle @SamNasr. I am currently the senior software engineer for NIS Technologies, where I also do instruction in a variety of different development topics. I've been certified with a few certifications from Microsoft, and I'm the active president of the Cleveland C# and VB.NET user group in Cleveland, as well as the .NET study group. And in addition to, I also run the Azure Cleveland user group. One of my other things that I've done in the past was authored multiple articles for Visual Studio Magazine, and I've been a 5-time Microsoft MVP. Like to give a little shameless plug to the Azure Cleveland user group. Granted, we're all from different parts of the world. However, since we meet online and virtually, the door's open to everyone to attend at any point in time. We meet every second Wednesday. The meetings are free of charge and open to the public, and we cover a variety of related topics to Azure, whether it's infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, or software as a service. So we cover a variety of topics, and you can find all the meeting information posted on meetup.com with the link listed there. Again, it is Azure Cleveland User Group. And so with that, let's dive into today's presentation about LUIS. So before we get into it, let's take a look at how we interacted with machines in the past. So if you look at the bottom left corner, back in the 70s, it was using punch cards, where it's basically the width of a pencil, and you had to punch in certain holes, and then it was fed through a reader. Then we progressed to the keyboard, where it was wired, and we were able to actually type in various commands. And then we got into the swiping type of interface, and now we can actually speak to our application and have it understand what it is that we're saying in natural spoken language. So with LUIS, as I mentioned earlier, it is Language Understanding Intelligence Service, and it is built on interactive machine learning provided by Microsoft Research. It uses a language model where we train it on various examples to parse natural spoken language. How does natural spoken language differ from any other form of language? It's basically, think of it this way. The text you would read in a textbook is different from someone speaking to you directly. So I could say, I want to buy a car, sell me a vehicle, I'm looking to get a new ride, for example. All three are different sentence structures, but the intention is the same, which is to purchase a vehicle or buy a car. So it works off of the natural spoken language, as opposed to having a specific structure where you indicate the noun and then the verb, or in some cases it's vice versa, but you just speak to it as you would any other person. And it is published as a REST API endpoint. So after I train my model and I publish it, now I access it just like I would any other API. And essentially, when I call that API, all I'm doing is I'm sending in a text string that's the input, and then it will respond with a JSON result set back that will indicate all the important pieces of that string, meaning what is the user's intention, and what specifics did the user intend on. Meaning, if I'm buying a car, am I looking for a red car, a blue car? I may not have specified color at all. So it will return all the various parts that I need to interact with as part of that sentence structure. And so essentially, as you see in the diagram over on the left portion, where we have the several phrases that are being passed in, I will submit it through the API endpoint. LUIS will then do the processing in the cloud, and then it will respond back with a JSON result set, as you see over on the right-hand side. And we'll dive into it in more detail in just a little bit. So with the language models, essentially there are models that I can utilize that are very specific to my LUIS apps. So I can specify whether I'm going to be using English or Hindi or French or some other language. And it forms the basis of what the user means. So again, I'm not necessarily looking at the sentence structure that the user is speaking to me, but I'm looking at overall what is the user's intention and what's their meaning. And so with that, I am looking at the core parts of the entire language model. So whenever we speak in English, the sentence can be broken down into containing a noun and a verb, and all those are parts of a sentence. So as you see in the sub bullets that I have there, if you say, I want to buy a Mustang is a model of a vehicle, right? So when I say I want to buy a Mustang, the intention that another human being would realize is that I want to buy a car. And so that is the intent, the verb, buy a car. And the noun could be either a Mustang or an Explorer or some other vehicle model that would be specified there. And so that structure, oh, pardon me, the slide flickered. So contained within that sentence, the utterance, I want to buy a Mustang, we have the intent, which is buy car, and then we have a noun which specifies what type of car that I want to buy. Now keep in mind, if you look at the intent, it is buy car, no spaces there. So that intent is a text string that I assign it as a token. So when Lewis understands that the user wants to purchase a vehicle, it will return this text token buy car. And again, notice no spaces in between it. And what it looks like when I submit my text string into Lewis, it returns a JSON result set back. So at the very top where you see the query that was submitted to Lewis, I want to buy a Mustang, it will return the top scoring intents as well as a confidence score rating. And the intents are listed from the highest confidence to the lowest confidence. But at the very beginning of that JSON result set, we have the query, and then it tells me which one is the top scoring intent, which is buy car, and then the score, which is a high rating of 99.99. And then it lists all the other intents that pertain to that phrase. And then it breaks it down into other things, so other entities or what type of car that I wanted to buy, which is in this case is a Mustang. It tells me that it's a type car because I trained it to look for a type of car. And it tells me that the Mustang word or that entity starts at position 16, ends at position 22, and then there's a 97.16% confidence score that is the entity that's specified in the sentence. So with everything, I always get a confidence score back. And as we had mentioned, it returns everything that it pertains to the developer, the important key parts of that sentence that was submitted to Lewis. And so this utilizes machine learning. And as Tom Mitchell specified in his book, Machine Learning, back in 1997, a computer program is set to learn to perform a task T from experience E if its performance at task T, as measured by a performance metric P, improves with experience E over time. Right? Sounds very straightforward, very easy to understand. What he is trying to say in a nutshell is that we improve the performance of our model by training it over and over again on various phrases. So we increase the performance, we get better metrics, we get a better experience as we train it over time. So how do we do that with Lewis? Essentially, when we're building a Lewis application, first and foremost, you need to create an Azure account, and then you need to create the resource, and then you obtain those keys. Once you obtain those keys, then you go over into the Lewis AI, and you would set up an app in the lewis.ai portal. After that, it's basically train and test until you get to the point where you're satisfied with the results. After you're satisfied, then you would just simply publish that as a REST endpoint and be able to access it. Okay, so this is the four-step process in a nutshell. Obviously, there's more details involved, which we'll walk through in just a minute, but these are the four main pieces to creating the application. So before we get into the demo, I just wanted to pause for a second and see if there's any questions. And I'm looking, let me take a peek in chat. Okay, doesn't seem like there's any questions related to that. So let's move forward with the demo. And with that, let me bring up my Visual Studio. Or better yet, as I mentioned, first and foremost, I need to create a resource and be able to obtain those keys. So to do that, I would click Create Resource in my Azure portal, and then it gives me all the different services that are available that I can um, initialize. And so I can just cut to the chase and type in Lewis, or better yet, language understanding. Whoops. Apologize, my keypad tends to be a little sensitive. So there is language service, and if I click on see all, you know, it was here just a little bit ago. That's kind of odd. All right, let's try this again. Lewis. Language understanding. There we go. So I'm going to go ahead and create that. It's going to ask me some very basic questions. For example, my subscription. Which resource group do I assign it to? And keep in mind that with any resource that I create in Azure, I need to assign it to a resource group. So I'm just going to go ahead and select RG1. And we'll just call it a Lewis test demo. We'll put this in, actually, let's go Western US. We'll select the pricing tier of free. So we have up to 5 calls per second or 1 million calls per month. So you have ample examples or you have ample time to use it to be able to test it free of charge without incurring any charges. And likewise, we'll select the free prediction tier, or the prediction pricing tier rather. Okay, so the name, let's call it 2. Nasr. Oh, okay, let's do this. Lewis. There we go. All right, so I specified all of my various options for creating it. We'll go ahead and click create. And now it initializes the deployment. Now I will go over into my main portal, and under RG1, my resource group 1, now I should see the Test Lewis app that I just created. And there is my Test Lewis. So once I have my application created, now what I need to do is go over to the keys and endpoint. And in my keys, I have the keys that are available to me. Obviously, they're kept hidden for a reason because of privacy. And it shows you the endpoint that is going to be utilized. So then I will take those keys, I'll copy it over to my clipboard, and then I'll go over to Lewis. And if you notice, Lewis is a separate website altogether. It's a different portal. I had already logged in under lewis.ai and signed in with the same credentials that I used for my Azure account. And now I can go over, whoops, wrong one. My apologies. So let me backtrack here, go into my applications. And so here are all the applications that I created previously in Lewis. So I can create a new application, and let's call this test app. Let's do 4. That's the next sequential one. We're going to keep the culture in English. And we're going to select done. I'm going to get a splash screen talking to me about what Lewis is all about, how to build my model, but I'll go ahead and skip that. Now, the next thing for me to do is I need to create an intent, meaning what are some of the different intentions that the user may submit to Lewis or ask. So since I'm a huge car fanatic, I'm going to build it as if it was a kiosk at a car dealership. So when you walk into a car dealership, one of the obvious things that you would do there is be able to purchase a vehicle or buy a car. So I'm going to create an intent and specify the intent name will be buy car. And now it's asking me for an example or a sample input of what the user might say. So I will say, I want to buy, let's see, a red Mustang. Now, within that sentence, it doesn't know yet which one is the noun or the entity. So I will highlight it. I select enter. Now it puts in that sample input. Now I can actually specify that Mustang is a new entity. And this entity is of type, I'm going to call this the car. Better yet, let's call it, yeah, let's just keep it. I bring in the word model too often. So now it's saying that we have an entity that's defined. Is it of type machine learned or is it a list? So the difference is with a machine learned, meaning that it's something that it's going to learn over time. What are the different cars that I have available? So if you think of car models, for example, with Ford, they have various model names that are introduced every year, some that kind of get deprecated and removed from the lineup. And so it's constantly an evolving list. As opposed to if I selected lists, this is something that is a finite list. What are some finite lists that we deal with? As it's stating here, airport codes. There's only a finite list of airport codes in the world. There's a finite number of days in the week, a finite number of months. And so these would be list items because I can't go beyond that. I won't be adding to it. So in our scenario, we're going to select machine learned because we're using a car model. And we'll select create. Now I have a sample utterance or a sentence of I want to buy a red Mustang. And here it's specifying it learned that Mustang in this case is a car because earlier I selected that word and specified that it is an entity. So now that I have a sample utterance in place, now you'll notice the score is set to NA or not available. And when I mouse over it, it says that the model has not been trained yet. So what I've done so far is I submitted a sample utterance, specified the intent, which is buy car as listed up here. And then in addition, I specified what the entity is, which is Mustang in my case. So I set all the various pieces parts, and now I need to train the model. So I'll go ahead and click on train. It's going to take just a minute since it's only one utterance. Now it comes back with a message that training has been completed. And now you notice that my score is now 0.93 or 93.2% confidence score that this phrase matches with buy car. So now I can test it. I can go over to my tests and I can say I want to buy Mustang. I click enter. Now it comes back with a confidence score of 89.1%. Now, if you notice, this phrase is slightly different than the previous one that I trained it on, which is a red Mustang. I omitted the color on purpose, but it was still able to figure out, even though it was a different sentence structure, I didn't specify the adjective or the color red, it understood that I still want to buy a Mustang. And so it came back with the intent of buy car. And it has a confidence score of 89%. Now, if I was to change things even more and say, I want to purchase a Mustang. And that came back with a 75% score. So anything higher than 50% will indicate that that is the highest scoring intent, and that is what it's going with. And so I'm satisfied with a 75% score for the confidence. And so if I'm satisfied at this point, now I can close my test panel. And now the next step is for me to publish it. And I have either a staging slot or a production slot to publish that endpoint. For now, I'm going to set it to a staging slot. And so you'll notice it says published app, test app 4 completed, access your endpoint URLs. I'll go ahead and click and access my endpoints. And sorry, let me move it over to production. I apologize for the technical delay, but now that I published it over into production, now it gave me a sample endpoint as specified here. Here's the endpoint, here's the primary key used, and a secondary key. But then if I want to access the entire thing, I can just utilize this entire URL and be able to access it. So if I go over, let's get this out of the way. Okay, so this is a previous URL or a previous Lewis application that I built. Same concept where we have the URL, and the URL is composed of various pieces where it utilizes the key. There's my subscription key for my Azure subscription. And you'll notice there's some additional parameters specified. Verbose is true. The time zone offset of when it's replying back. And then the parameter Q, which is essentially a string that I'm going to substitute here. So a user might say something like, I want to buy Explorer, for example. So that came back, and then let me expand that a bit. So there's the phrase that was submitted. It comes back with an intent of buy car, and that's the highest scoring intent in the list, and it has a confidence score of 42.6%. Now, I think what threw it off is I included the quotes, which I should not have. So let me go ahead and clean that up. I apologize, this Teams toolbar is in the way. All right, there we go. All right, so it got a little bit better. I want to buy an Explorer is now 46.8%, and the intent is buy car. So what do I do at this point? I already have my URI. I trained it. Let's submit another example. Type in, I want to get a Mustang. And so, again, it recognizes that the highest intent is buy car, and that's at 49%. So at a car dealership, you may want to do a variety of different things. Other than buying a car, you may be able to just browse the inventory to see what's available. You may be wanting to service your car and get an oil change. You may want to speak to the manager. You may want to wash a car. So all these are various intents that I had trained my model on previous to this demo. And so when I specify verbose, here verbose equals to true, as highlighted here in the URL, it brings back all the intents that are specified within that application. So what I could do is change that to false. Now when I submit that same query, I want to get a Mustang, it's still returning the intent of buy car back, but then everything else has been removed. Excuse me. Everything else here has been removed because I set verbose set to false. But now that I have my endpoint published and now I'm able to access it, now I can actually utilize it in an application. And to do that, let me share with you an application that I wrote. And so the UI for this is very straightforward, very simple. It's basically an application that is intended to be at a car dealership, and it's going to be a kiosk where a customer could walk in and simply submit a command and then press the search button, and then it will come back with the results listed here. So again, it'll take a text string, click search, and then the results will appear in the output pane window here. So the code behind that is we have in the button search event handler, we're going to be calling the method Lewis parse. Pardon me while I take a drink. What Lewis parse is going to do, essentially, it's going to instantiate an HTTP client. That URI that I copied and pasted earlier from my Lewis AI portal, I can now use that here. And you'll notice that at the end, I append this query variable. So this query variable is what's passed to me when I call Lewis parse rather. And in this line that's highlighted, that query string is essentially the text box that was entered in. So I'll take whatever text the user entered in, I'll pass it to Lewis parse as the variable query, and then I will append the variable query at the end of my URI, and then I'll be able to make the call to that URI. So after I built my URI and I already have my HTTP client instantiated, the next thing is to do an await client get async because I'm making a web API call and it's asynchronous. So I'm going to wait for the results to come back. When it returns with the result set, first thing I'm going to do is check to see that the status code is successful. Then the next thing, I'm going to take that JSON result set and read it as a string. And then I'm going to deserialize that JSON result set into a response array. And so with the response, into the response object rather. That response object will contain a set of intents as well as a set of entities. So intents is what's the user's intention. Entities are the items that were defined in that utterance, whether it be a Mustang or an Explorer or some other vehicle name. So once I find out what the user's intent is, I'm going to do a switch on their intent, and I'm looking at the top intent. And again, keep in mind, at a car dealership, you can do a variety of things: buy a car, service the car, wash the car. So I'm looking to see what the top intent is because that's the highest confidence that Lewis is returning to me of what we think the user means. And then I'm going to act accordingly. So I have the top intent, or the case of buying a car, the case for servicing the car, and anytime I have a switch statement, I always need to check for default. So meaning that it didn't catch in any of those case statements, I need to have something to fall back on. So in case I get nothing back from Lewis, then I just simply respond by saying, please rephrase that, I didn't understand you. And so with that, let's go ahead and step through the app. And while it's ramping up, let me take a quick peek and see if there's any questions in chat. Oh, wow, a lot of questions. Okay. Is it possible to integrate with Azure Bot Service? Yes, absolutely. Okay, so we covered that. Lewis supports speech-to-text conversion. Not really. It is the speech-to-text and text-to-speech are different services altogether. However, they can integrate with Lewis in the sense of I can speak into my application and convert that to text. Once I have that text, I can simply append it at the end of my URI here and then submit it to Lewis, and then Lewis will understand what the intention is and then return it back. So it is not necessarily a direct piece in Lewis, but it's another service within Azure Cognitive Services that can be tied into Lewis. Is Lewis service available on premises? No, unfortunately. It utilizes the cloud, and as we had seen here, I need to make that API endpoint in order to be able to access it. For integrating with his biz application. I'm not sure I understand that part of the question. If whoever asked it could rephrase it, I would appreciate it. Question number 4. I'm sorry?
He is asked, Sam, actually, he asking is that his question is that his company has 2 products, one ERP and another one is help desk. In that context, if he wants to use Lewis service, then for different 2 application, he needs to take 2 subscription, or a single subscription is enough for using in 2 products.
So I would steer with having it as 2 separate models because, again, you're going to be using 2 different utterances. And as you progress and your application builds and the model learns from experience, you want it to go down a specific path with those phrases as opposed to another one with various phrases. And so if they're 2 different applications, I would keep them as 2 separate apps in Lewis and develop them that way. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, hope he will get the answer.
Okay. And then number 4, if I have multiple applications, can I take multiple Lewis subscription? Yes, you can have multiple Lewis subscriptions. As you had seen in the portal, I had multiple applications. Let me go ahead and open that up again. So there is my Lewis, and then you see that I have multiple applications that I developed here. And then within each application, you can also stage it to a staging slot, or you can stage it, sorry, bad wording. I can publish it to a staging slot, or I can publish it to a production slot. So this gives me the opportunity where I have version 1 in production, and I continue to modify it, and now I have a version 2 that I want to test. So I would publish version 2 to staging while I still have version 1 in production. When I'm satisfied with version 2 and ready to migrate it to production, then I can overwrite what's in production, or better yet, as you see in the URI, I can have multiple versions that are available. His company has 2 product applications. Okay, I think we already answered that question, and I think we answered all questions. Is that correct? Okay, so I should have prefaced it that at any point you have a question, feel free to jump in, either verbally or in chat, and we'll be happy to take it. And so at this stage, I think my application is ramped up and ready for testing. So here is the sample UI. And so I preloaded it with, I want to buy a car. So again, this is a scenario where a customer walks into a dealership, they see this kiosk, and they enter in the phrase, I want to buy a car. Very generic, he didn't specify a model. We'll click search. And now let's walk through step by step what's actually happening. So this is the event handler, and I just clicked search. So now it's going to call Lewis parse. And let me reduce this just a bit. There we go. So now we instantiated our HTTP client, we set our URI, we appended the query string at the end. I want to buy a car, we just appended it to the URI. And now we have that entire URI set, and we're making a call to get async. Now it has returned. We're going to check to see the status code is true, and it is. And then we start to deserialize our response. Within our response object, we have an array of intents and an array of entities. Pardon me, my throat's a little dry. And so we're checking the top scoring intent. And so we take the one at the index 0, and that one will be, after we assign it, it will be by car. Because I didn't specify an entity, the entity array is now 0. And so we get over into our switch statement, and we try to figure out what is it that the customer wants. And so Lewis helps us to decipher that by returning the token. In this case, the token is by car. And we're able to act accordingly. So now we know the user wants to buy a car, so we can tell him we have X number of cars in stock. And what I did for that is, in order to make the demo a little bit simple and easy to understand, I created, let me go over to my Solution Explorer. I created a class called car, and then within it, I have an array called car inventory. And there I hard-coded 3 separate vehicles that are in our inventory. In addition, within that structure, I specified all the key metadata for a vehicle. So obviously every record will have to have an ID. Every car has a year, a make, model, and color. And so all those are specified in my 3 vehicles here. So essentially it's hard-coded data, so I don't have to interact with a database. It's hard-coded in my demo app. And now I can just figure out what is it that the user wants. And since he wants to buy a car, now I can respond and say, we have car inventory.count cars in stock, which essentially reads as, and we'll see in the output window, we have 3 cars in stock. So I'm beginning the conversation with my user to see, what is it that he's interested in. Had he said, I want to buy a Mustang, I could capture that entity where it says, I want a Mustang, and be able to respond accordingly by saying, we have one Mustang in stock. So that's the whole intention of Lewis, is it takes a natural spoken language phrase, it deciphers it, and produces a token that the developer can then take, incorporate in the application, and then act accordingly to carry on the dialogue with the customer, or the end user in this case. So let me pause here and see if there's any questions. Let me check chat. Okay, no new questions. So we'll continue on with our presentation. And we had left off at the demo. So as I mentioned earlier, entity types, essentially they can be either machine learned or list items. Machine learned, if you recall, these are items that the machine or Lewis will learn from context over time as we train it. Or it could be a fixed closed set of items or words, meaning days of the week, months of the year, etc. We can also use a regex to extract an entity from a regular expression pattern. So for example, we can, depending on what the phrase may be, we can always say that the entity will be starting at index 3 and ending at index 7, assuming we always have a fixed sentence structure in that case. Or we can specify a pattern, which is a variable length placeholder. Um, so let's say, for example, that I ask my user to always specify car model at the end of the sentence, then it will obviously the car model will be, or the car name will be varying in length. So I can specify that it's always the last word at the end of variable length, or possibly in the middle of the sentence or utterance, but it's also variable length. And that's where I would use pattern.any. As far as languages, we have a variety of languages that are supported, and you see that there's pre-built entity support. So it's not just English, but we also have French, Italian, and a variety of other languages. But in addition, these languages also carry over into models. And so there are pre-built models with the domains for date, time, number, percentage, currency and money, geography. And so this chart will show you the breakdown of what are the pre-built entities and what language models that they're available in. For managing Lewis, you can utilize the dashboard to monitor the usage and the intents targeted. You can also use it to manage the keys, as we had mentioned earlier. And you can use it for batch testing. So if I break out into my Lewis portal again, and let me expand this just a little bit more. So we'll see that within my test app that I have a dashboard, and it will show me the historical usage. There's a little bit of a delay here, but it will show you the usage overall, the training evaluation of the number of predictions that were correct or incorrect. I can then use it to build, where I specify the intents that I'm creating within my model. And then for managing it, here's where I specify my endpoints and whether I want to make them public or not. In addition, if you look at the test tab, obviously we're able to enter in phrases into this text box here. But in addition, there's also a batch testing panel that I clicked on. Let me backtrack and show that again. It is the link that's listed up in the upper right-hand corner under the test menu. So when I click that, what this will allow me to do is to be able to import a JSON format file that has all the various keys, sorry, bad word, has all the various utterances and what intent they should be set to. And so this way I can import an entire JSON set. And if you want to see what that would look like, something similar to this, where I would submit the text, submit the intent, and then any entities that are specified within that text. So if you recall, these were things that I had done through the UI by clicking and pointing to them. But now I can do a batch test where I can submit everything through a JSON file in one shot. And so with batch testing, I have an array of utterances in the JSON format. I specify the entity indices of where that entity lies within that sentence structure. But the key thing is entities are not allowed to start or end in the middle of the word. So meaning it has to be a separate word all on its own. And I have a maximum of 1,000 utterances that I can submit in each file. After I trained it and I'm satisfied with it, like we mentioned earlier, we can now publish to either a staging slot where it's an environment for testing and doing updates without breaking the production slot consumed by the end user. So this allows me to do continuous development and upgrading of my model, while at the same time providing a production level application for my end user. And so within the publishing options, we have sentiment analysis that's also available. And what this does is it allows Lewis to integrate with the text analytics to provide sentiment, meaning to identify whether something is good or bad, whether it's a toxic comment or a rude comment or something that is favorable and acceptable. And then in addition, we have speech priming, which what this does is it sends the Lewis model to a speech service prior to the conversion of text to speech. So if I'm utilizing text to speech service along with Lewis, I can utilize the speech priming attribute of it. As far as cost, as we had seen, there's the free layer or a free subscription service, and it allows me up to 5 calls per second for my testing, up to 10,000 calls per month. And if I need to upgrade that, then I have the SO standard, which is 50 calls per second, and then I think it's $1.50 after that, I believe, as listed on the bottom. Some gotchas that I came across, and hopefully things that you need to be aware of. First of all, you must have an Azure subscription prior to logging into Lewis. If you don't, and you just log into Lewis without an Azure subscription, the top navigation bar will be missing. It won't even be grayed out. It'll be completely missing. The second thing, don't forget to publish the application after training it. Just because I trained it in my Lewis portal doesn't mean that it's ready for use until I click the publish button. And then I need to be aware that culture cannot be changed once the application is created prior to version 3. I think the most recent version is version 4 now of Lewis, and so that will allow the culture change after it's been published. However, prior versions do not allow that. And as we had seen earlier, there is a delay in the dashboard metrics with the refreshes. And this is something that was kept over, but if you're using legacy type browsers, you'll need to have it where it's a WebRTC compatible browser. And this will be used for the speech API specifically. But again, this applies only to older browsers. And so with that, let me check for questions one last time. Is the Bangla language supported by Lewis? I don't know. I'd have to look at that chart a little bit closer. Is the demo available on Git or somewhere for download? Yes, it should be available on GitHub, and I'll make my link available. Can we integrate with e-commerce sites? So depends on how you want to integrate it with the e-commerce site and what kind of endpoints are available for that e-commerce site to integrate with. Obviously, once you have the application and you get the intent of what the user wants, how is it that you're going to interact with that e-commerce site? There's got to be endpoints for you to call into it. And so we're coming up on the closing of the presentation. So wanted to, all right, and someone just checked that sadly, no, it is not supported, does not support the Bangla language. All right, not yet at least. You never know what could happen in the near future. Anyhow, so continuing on, I always like to do a recap, especially in person. So we talked about what is Lewis, and that is a language understanding intelligence service. We create the app through the lewis.ai portal after we set up our resource in our Azure. We discussed some of the gotchas that we came across, meaning that you have to be logged into the Lewis AI portal, you have to be logged into the Azure portal before logging into Lewis. Otherwise, you won't see the top nav bar. We talked about changing culture for version 3 and after. Some references, if you're interested in reading more about Lewis and getting a better understanding of it, it's available over on Microsoft Docs. Some very useful links that are supported here, as well as walkthroughs for other demos. But if you're interested in having this as a course, or if you're wondering, is AI or is Lewis a good fit for my organization, I or someone else at NIS Technologies would be happy to help you. Not only do we offer consulting, but we also offer classes in development of AI and cognitive services. You can check out our course list over at nistechnologies.com under the Education tab. And if you need any of my links, you can find me over at Linktree/Sam Nasr. But more specifically, if there's any questions I can answer for you or assist you with your Lewis project or anything involving your AI project, you can reach out to me, snasr@nistechnologies.com. You can also find me on Twitter at Sam Nasr, and I blog every so often regarding technical articles and other events over on samnasr.blogspot.com. And lastly, if you're not already a member of my network, I invite you to connect with me on LinkedIn, and you can find me there as well as, you can find me in LinkedIn at Sam Nasr. And so with that, I thank you all for attending. Again, if you have any questions, I'd be happy to take them either now or feel free to email me at a later time. So thanks again, and thank you, Ahsan, and all the other organizers for putting this together, and appreciate the invite, having me speak.
Thank you, Sam. Thank you. Thank you very much. I personally grateful to you that you have you have given so much effort for presenting the session, and it's a very much interesting session. I hope this session will be helpful for the audience. And actually, this new service is there are many more opportunities are there for integrating this with the Bangladeshi audience applications. So nice to have you with us.
Pleasure's all mine. Thank you.
And hopefully, if I requesting to the audience that if you have any question or if you have any assistance or if you wants to learn more about the Luis and any AI service or AI based any service of Azure, you can contact with Sam Nasser, and he is personally working on it, and I believe he will help you a lot, not only personal skill development, but also your organizational assistance. Thank you, Sam. Thank you very much. Hopefully, we will you will join in another session with with another interesting topic.
Would be happy to.
I'm gonna upload your session within few minutes, and thank you very much again.
All right. Thank you. Goodbye,
Thank you
everyone.
very much, everyone. Goodbye. Uh, Thank you everyone for joining this conference, and we try to learn with from the experts and around the world, and it will be very much helpful for us to get the opportunity from the community to skill up our knowledge, and I will be happy if you can implement this knowledge to your organization and your life. That will be very much productive. And in coming days, we are arranging another session, another event. Regularly, we are a third Saturday of each month. We are arranging user group event. Hopefully in June, we will going to arrange another session. We are very much thankful to attend this session, and till June, goodbye. Thank you, everyone. Goodbye for today. I'm going to quit from this event. Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Bye, everyone.